In the darkest corner of the Galactic Empire's most secure facility, something ancient stirs. For 3,000 years, the creature known only as the Devourer has remained locked away, its very existence a closely guarded secret. Legends speak of entire star systems consumed, of fleets turned to cosmic dust with a single roar. The most powerful beings in the galaxy have tried and failed to communicate with it. Scholars, telepaths, even AI constructs, all have been driven to madness or death by mere proximity to the beast. But the Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, or perhaps desperation, has made an impossible decision. He's sending a human, not a warrior, not a scholar, not even a diplomat. Just a simple caretaker from a backwater planet called Earth. The court thinks it's a death sentence. The military calls it madness. The creature itself hasn't acknowledged another living being's presence in over a millennium. What they don't understand is that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't strength or intelligence or technology. Sometimes it's something far more dangerous: compassion without fear, kindness without agenda, and the stubborn human refusal to give up on anyone, even a monster that could end civilizations with a thought. The beast is about to discover why humans are the galaxy's newest and most unpredictable variable. And the Empire is about to learn that when a human decides to care about something, the universe itself might just have to make room. Marcus Chen had been scrubbing floors for 3 months when the Imperial Guard came for him. He was elbow-deep in the hydroponic systems of Agricultural Bay 7, humming an old Earth tune while he cleaned algae buildup from the nutrient tubes, when the heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber. The sound was wrong, too precise, too measured for the usual farm workers who shuffled through these corridors. Marcus straightened up, wiping his hands on his work coveralls, and turned to see 4 figures in the midnight blue armor of the Emperor's personal guard. Their helmets reflected the grow lights like dark mirrors, hiding their faces completely. The lead guard stepped forward, his voice carrying the artificial authority that came through helmet speakers. Marcus Chen, identification number 7749, Delta, Gamma, originally of the Earth colony New Brisbane. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. Earthborn humans were rare this far into Imperial space, especially ones working maintenance jobs on agricultural stations. Yes, that's me. Is there some kind of problem? You will come with us. Now, the other 3 guards formed a loose triangle around him. Not threatening exactly, but making it clear that refusing wasn't an option. Marcus had learned enough about Imperial politics in his short time off-world to know that when the Emperor's guard showed up, you didn't ask questions. You just followed and hoped you lived long enough to understand why. He stripped off his work gloves and grabbed his personal kit from the nearby locker. 3 months of savings, a few photographs from home, and his father's old pocket watch. Everything he owned in the galaxy fit into a bag smaller than his fist. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he'd been planning to inherit his family's farm. Now he was being escorted by the Empire's most elite soldiers to who knew where. The journey through the station's corridors felt surreal. Other workers pressed themselves against the walls as the guard formation passed, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations in a dozen different languages, speculation about what crime he might have committed, what secret he might know. The truth was far simpler and infinitely more complicated. He had volunteered for the most dangerous job posting in Imperial records, and somehow impossibly been selected. The transport ship that waited in the station's primary docking bay was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was sleek and black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, with lines that seemed to flow like liquid metal. No markings, no identification codes, just the kind of anonymous menace that screamed official secrecy. Inside, the accommodations were Spartanly comfortable. A single cabin with a bed, a small desk, and a viewport that showed the stars wheeling by as they jumped to faster-than-light travel. The guards left him alone once they were underway, though he could hear them talking in low voices in the corridor outside. Their language was High Imperial, the formal tongue of the royal court, and Marcus's translation implant could only catch fragments. Unprecedented decision, and with madness to send a primitive emperor's will. Marcus stared out the viewport and tried to process what he'd gotten himself into. The job posting had been vague to the point of uselessness. Caretaker position, extreme isolation, hazard pay, applicants must demonstrate psychological resilience and absence of fear responses. The psychological evaluation alone had taken 2 weeks and involved tests that probed the darkest corners of his mind. They'd shown him images that made hardened soldiers vomit, played sounds that induced panic in most sentient species, even exposed him to low-level telepathic assault to see how his mind would react. He'd passed everything with flying colors, though he still wasn't entirely sure why. Marcus had never considered himself particularly brave or resilient. He was just a farmer's son from a quiet colony world, someone who'd grown up around animals and found that most living things responded well to patience and consistency. The evaluators had seemed both fascinated and disturbed by his psychological profile, especially his apparent inability to experience existential dread when confronted with incomprehensibly vast or powerful phenomena. Fascinating, the lead psychiatrist had murmured after the final session. No trace of cosmic horror response. No fight-or-flight activation when faced with the unknown. It's almost as if fear of the incomprehensible has been edited out of his neural structure. Marcus had wanted to tell her that it wasn't an absence of fear, it was just that he'd learned early that being afraid of something didn't make it go away. His father had taught him that with injured animals, with sick crops, with the endless small emergencies of farm life. You acknowledged the danger, you respected it, but you didn't let it paralyze you. You just rolled up your sleeves and got to work. The ship dropped out of hyperspace 3 times during the journey, each jump taking them farther from any inhabited system Marcus recognized. By the 4th day, the stars outside his viewport were completely unfamiliar, arranged in patterns that no human eye had ever seen from Earth. They were deep in the Imperial core now, in space so heavily classified that even having knowledge of these coordinates was probably a capital offense. On the 5th day, they reached their destination. Marcus pressed his face to the viewport as the ship approached what looked like a small moon floating in empty space. But as they drew closer, he realized it was entirely artificial. A sphere of dark metal covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow when he wasn't looking directly at them. Massive defensive platforms orbited the structure like deadly satellites, their weapon systems tracking their approach with mechanical precision. "Facility Omega-7, one of the guards said, breaking the silence they'd maintained for days. Your new home." The docking process was elaborate and clearly automated. The ship was guided through multiple security checkpoints, each one involving scans that made Marcus's skin tingle with exotic energies. He caught glimpses of other ships in the facility's docking bays. Sleek research vessels, heavily armed patrol craft, and stranger things that defied easy categorization. Everything was painted in the same light-absorbing black, as if the entire facility was designed to be invisible against the void of space. Inside the station, Marcus was processed through another series of checkpoints. Biometric scans, psychological evaluation updates, even what appeared to be some kind of spiritual or psychic assessment that left him feeling slightly dizzy. The facility's corridors were wide and sterile, lit by panels that emitted a soft white light that somehow felt unnatural. The few personnel he saw wore unmarked uniforms and avoided eye contact. Finally, he was brought to what appeared to be a briefing room. A single table, 2 chairs, and a holographic projector in the center. The guards positioned themselves at the door and activated some kind of privacy field. Marcus could see their mouths moving, but no sound reached his ears. The woman who entered was perhaps the most elegant being Marcus had ever encountered. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had grown up in low gravity, her silver hair arranged in the complex braids favored by imperial nobility. Her eyes were the deep purple of genetic modification, marking her as someone with significant wealth and social standing. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable accent of the imperial court. "Chen, I am Administrator Kasishi Velorum. Welcome to Facility Omega-7. I trust your journey was illuminating." Marcus stood up straighter, suddenly aware of how his simple coveralls must look to someone accustomed to imperial finery. "Ma'am, I have to admit, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm doing here." She gestured for him to sit, then activated the holographic projector. Images began to flow through the air between them. Star charts, facility schematics, and finally, something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. It was a chamber, vast beyond comprehension, its walls lost in shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. In the center, suspended in what looked like a web of energy fields and containment barriers, was something that defied description. It was huge, easily the size of a small building, but its shape seemed to shift and flow as if it existed in more dimensions than Marcus's eyes could perceive. Tentacles or appendages writhed in patterns that hurt to follow, covered in what might have been scales or might have been stars. Eyes, or things that served the same function, opened and closed along its surface like breathing flowers. "This," Administrator Valorum said quietly, "is why you're here." Marcus stared at the image for a long moment, waiting for the fear to hit, waiting for his mind to rebel against what it was seeing, for the cosmic horror response that had driven dozens of previous caretakers to madness or suicide. Instead, he found himself leaning forward, studying the creature with the same detached interest he might show a particularly complex piece of farm equipment. "It's beautiful," he said finally. The administrator's carefully controlled expression slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine surprise. "Beautiful? I mean, I've never seen anything like it, but Marcus gestured at the shifting, impossible form suspended in the hologram. "Look at the way it moves. There's a pattern there, a rhythm. It's not random. It's almost like it's dancing. Mr. Chen, this entity has been in containment for 3,217 years. In that time, it has killed 47 researchers, driven 63 others to permanent madness, and caused the complete evacuation of this facility twice. Its very presence warps space-time in ways that our best scientists still don't understand. It has shown no interest in communication, no response to any stimulus, no indication that it even acknowledges the existence of other life forms." Marcus nodded slowly. "What does it eat?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "I beg your pardon. At least it seems to be. So it must consume some form of energy or matter to survive. What does it eat?" Administrator Valorum was silent for a moment, consulting something on a personal display that materialized in front of her. "Energy. It appears to metabolize several forms of exotic radiation that we generate artificially. The feeding process occurs approximately every 72 hours and requires careful coordination between multiple departments. And before it was captured, what did it eat in the wild? According to historical records, it consumed..." She paused as if reluctant to continue. "Entire solar systems, the gravitational energy from collapsing stars, the exotic matter created during planetary formation. It was found in the aftermath of what had been a thriving star system, apparently hibernating after consuming everything within 12 light-years." Marcus whistled softly. "That's a hell of a metabolism. No wonder it's been so inactive in captivity. It's probably been slowly starving for 3,000 years. The administrator stared at him. Mr. Bastow said, "Chen, do you understand what you're suggesting? This creature destroyed civilizations. Billions of sentient beings died because of its appetite." "Maybe," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Or maybe it was just trying to survive and it didn't realize there was anyone else around. I mean, if you're used to eating stars, individual planets probably don't even register as significant, right? It would be like expecting me to notice bacteria while I'm harvesting wheat." The hologram shifted, showing the creature from different angles. In each image, it remained motionless except for the slow, hypnotic movement of its appendages. Marcus found himself studying those movements more carefully, looking for patterns, for any sign of intention or awareness. "Your job," Administrator Valorum continued, "is simple in concept and unprecedented in execution. You will be assigned to the creature's containment chamber for 12 hours per day. You will monitor its condition, oversee its feeding schedule, and perform basic maintenance on the containment systems. Every detail of its behavior, every change in its bio readings, every fluctuation in its energy patterns must be documented and reported. And the previous caretakers? What happened to them? The position has been vacant for 18 months. The last caretaker lasted exactly 14 minutes before suffering what our medical staff described as a complete ontological breakdown. The one before that made it 3 days before attempting to breach the containment barrier, presumably to, in his words, join with the infinite consciousness beyond mortal understanding. Marcus absorbed this information with the same calm he'd shown everything else. I see, and the Emperor believes I'll do better because... Gum. Chen, your psychological profile indicates that you are either completely immune to the creature's apparent ability to induce existential terror, or you are so fundamentally different from other sentient species that its influence simply doesn't affect you the same way. Frankly, we're not sure which possibility is more disturbing. The administrator stood up, the hologram flickering out as she deactivated the projector. You'll be shown to your quarters and given a complete briefing on safety protocols tomorrow. Your first shift begins in 48 hours. I strongly suggest you use that time to prepare yourself mentally. As she moved toward the door, Marcus called after her. Administrator, just one more question. What's its name? Its designation is Xenobiological Specimen Omega Prime. Most of the staff simply call it the Devourer. Marcus shook his head. No, I mean, its name, its real name. Surely something that old, that powerful, has to have a name. For the first time since entering the room, Administrator Valorum smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Mr. Chen, if that creature has a name, it's written in a language that predates most of the stars you see in the sky, whatever it calls itself. No living mind could pronounce it without being fundamentally altered by the experience. Well, Marcus said as the guards moved to escort him out, I guess I'll just have to ask it myself. He was already thinking about tomorrow, about the impossible creature waiting in its ancient prison, about the challenge that lay ahead. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The quarters they assigned him were comfortable but clearly temporary, a small room with a bed, a desk, and another viewport that looked out into the swirling darkness surrounding the facility. Marcus unpacked his few belongings and sat on the edge of the bed, his father's pocket watch ticking steadily in his hands. Well, Dad, he murmured to the empty room, looks like I found something even stranger than Mrs. Patterson's prize bull. Outside his window, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and somewhere in the depths of the facility, something ancient stirred in its containment chamber. Marcus Chen, farmer's son from New Brisbane, closed his eyes and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. He fell asleep, smiling. Marcus woke to the soft chime of the facility's artificial dawn cycle. The viewport had shifted from showing the star-filled void to a gentle blue glow that mimicked Earth's morning sky. A small comfort that someone had programmed into the station's systems. He lay still for a moment, letting his mind catch up with his circumstances. Today he would meet the creature that had terrified the galaxy for millennia. After a quick shower and a breakfast of synthesized protein that almost tasted like bacon, Marcus made his way to the briefing center. The facility's layout was beginning to make sense to him. Concentric rings of security, each one more restricted than the last, with the creature's containment chamber at the absolute center. He passed through 3 more checkpoints, each one requiring biometric verification and what appeared to be some kind of psychic stability scan. Chief Security Officer Varric was waiting for him in the equipment bay, a massive Cruonian whose reptilian features were set in a permanent scowl. His scales had the dull sheen of someone who'd spent too many years in artificial environments, and his eyes held the haunted look that Marcus was beginning to recognize in most of the facility's long-term staff. "Chen," Varric's voice rumbled through his translator unit. "You ready for this madness?" "As ready as anyone can be for something completely unprecedented, I suppose," Marcus replied, examining the equipment laid out on the nearby tables. "This is my gear." Helmet's got triple redundant life support and emergency teleportation beacon. Won't help if the thing decides to really focus on you, but it'll keep you alive through the background weirdness. Varek held up a device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a medical scanner. Biomonitor/recording device. Documents everything. Your vital signs, the creature's behavior patterns, environmental fluctuations. Don't lose it, Marcus nodded, running his hands over the suit's fabric. It felt surprisingly light despite the obvious complexity of its construction. Microservos were built into the joints, and the helmet displayed a bewildering array of readouts and controls. The containment chamber is 7 levels down, Varric continued. We take a secured lift that only stops at that floor. Once you're inside, you've got full mobility within the observation deck. The creature itself is behind multiple containment barriers. Energy fields, gravitic distortion, temporal displacement fields. Don't ask me to explain how they work. I just know they've held for 3,000 years. What about communication systems? Standard comm array connects you to the monitoring station. But Chen, Varric's expression grew even more serious. If you start talking weird, if you start saying things that don't make sense, we're pulling you out immediately. No arguments, no second chances. Too many good people have been lost to that thing's influence. The lift ride down was eerily quiet. Marcus watched the level indicators flash by. Alpha, beta, gamma, each one representing another layer of security and isolation. When they finally reached Omega level, the doors opened to reveal a corridor that felt fundamentally different from the rest of the facility. The walls here were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them, and the air itself felt heavy, charged with some kind of energy that made his skin tingle. Psionic dampening fields, Varric explained, noticing Marcus's reaction, helps keep the creature's influence contained. Some people find them uncomfortable. Marcus found them oddly soothing, actually. It was like the psychic equivalent of white noise, filling in a background hum he hadn't even realized was there. They walked through 2 more airlocks before finally reaching the observation chamber. The room beyond took Marcus's breath away. It was vast, easily 100 meters across and just as tall, its walls lost in shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. In the center, suspended within a complex web of energy fields that coruscated with every color Marcus had ever seen and several he was pretty sure he hadn't, was the creature. Seeing it in person was nothing like the holographic representation. It was bigger, for one thing. Much bigger. The thing had to be at least 30 meters long, its bulk shifting and flowing within the containment field like liquid physics. What he'd taken for tentacles were more like extensions of its body that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As he watched, one of them phased through what appeared to be solid matter, only to become substantial again a moment later. But it was the creature's beauty that struck him most. Every movement was fluid grace, every shift in its impossible anatomy like watching mathematics made manifest. Patterns of light flowed across its surface, not bioluminescence exactly, but something far more complex. It was like looking at the visual representation of a symphony, or the way sunlight moved through water. God, Marcus whispered. Most people's first reaction is screaming, Varric said dryly. You're already an improvement. Marcus moved closer to the observation platform's edge. The containment barrier was invisible except for a slight shimmer in the air, but he could feel its presence. A wall of force that probably contained energies beyond human understanding. The creature was perhaps 20 meters away, close enough that he could see details that the hologram had missed. Its skin, if it could be called skin, was covered in structures that looked almost like scales, but each one was a tiny mandala of impossible complexity. As Marcus watched, they shifted and changed, forming new patterns that seemed to respond to some internal rhythm. Eyes opened and closed along its surface, each one a different size and configuration, as if the creature saw across multiple spectrums simultaneously. How long has it been like this? Marcus asked. Motionless? About 600 years, give or take a decade. Before that, it used to move around the chamber more, test the containment barriers. The research teams thought it was looking for weaknesses, planning an escape. Then one day it just stopped. Been in that exact position ever since. Marcus studied the creature's posture more carefully. It wasn't motionless. He could see the subtle movements, the slow pulse of its breathing, the gentle flow of those impossible appendages. But there was something about its position that reminded him of something. "It's sleeping," he said suddenly. Varric laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Chen, that thing doesn't sleep. It's an apex predator, possibly the most dangerous entity in known space. It doesn't have downtime." "Look at its positioning," Marcus insisted. "The way its appendages are arranged, the rhythm of its breathing, even the pattern of lights on its surface. I've seen this before with large animals, cattle, horses, even dogs. This is what they look like when they're in deep sleep, dreaming. That's impossible. Our sensors show constant brain activity, energy fluctuations consistent with an alert state. Maybe its brain never shuts down completely. Maybe its species doesn't sleep the way other creatures do. But I'm telling you, this is what sleep looks like." Marcus pointed to one of the smaller appendages that was moving in a slow, rhythmic pattern. "See that? That's REM movement. It's dreaming." The security chief stared at him for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely." Marcus activated his recording device and began documenting his observations.
"Chief, how long has it been since this creature had any kind of environmental stimulation?"
"Chen, the last time we tried to stimulate it, it killed 3 researchers and nearly breached containment." "I don't mean experiments. I mean basic environmental enrichment. Changes in lighting, different sounds, even just interaction. When did someone last try to simply talk to it?" Varric consulted his data pad. According to the logs, direct communication attempts ceased approximately 2,000 years ago after a series of incidents involving telepathic contact. Why? Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the slow, hypnotic movements of the creature's breathing. An idea was forming in his mind, something that would probably sound completely insane to the security-focused staff of this facility. "Chief, in your opinion, what's the longest this creature could potentially live?" "Our best estimates suggest it could be functionally immortal. The energy patterns we're seeing are consistent with a being that could potentially exist for millions of years, and it's been in this chamber for 3,000 years, alone, with no stimulation, no interaction, nothing to do but exist within these barriers." Marcus turned to face Varric directly. "Chief, I think this creature isn't dangerous because it's malevolent. I think it's dangerous because it's going slowly insane from isolation." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the containment systems. Varric's expression had gone from skeptical to genuinely disturbed. "You're suggesting what exactly?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the reason previous caretakers failed wasn't because the creature attacked them. Maybe it was because they tried to study it instead of trying to help it." Before Varric could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed along the walls, and automated voices announced something about energy fluctuations and containment stability. Marcus looked back at the creature and felt his heart skip a beat. It was looking at him. One of the larger eyes, a swirling kaleidoscope of colors that hurt to focus on directly, had opened and fixed on his position. The creature's movements had changed, become more focused, more intentional. Other eyes were opening now, dozens of them, each one turning to study the observation deck. "We need to go," Varric said, his hand moving to the emergency evacuation controls. "Now." Instead, he stepped closer to the barrier, looking directly into that impossible eye. The pressure in his head increased, not painful exactly, but overwhelming, like trying to hear a whisper during a thunderstorm. Images flashed through his mind, too fast and too strange to understand. Vast spaces filled with dying stars, the sensation of movement across impossible distances. Loneliness that stretched across geological time. "Hello," Marcus said quietly. The creature went completely still. Every eye was focused on him now, and the patterns of light flowing across its surface had changed to something that might have been excitement, interest. The pressure in his head shifted, becoming less chaotic, more organized. still incomprehensible but with an underlying structure that reminded him of language. "My name is Marcus," he continued, his voice steady despite the fact that his hands were shaking. "I'm your new caretaker." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The creature's entire body shifted, flowing within the containment field like liquid starlight. The energy readings on Marcus's suit spiked dangerously, and somewhere behind him he could hear Varric shouting into his communicator about emergency protocols and potential containment breaches. But Marcus didn't feel threatened. The pressure in his mind had changed again, becoming something almost gentle. The flashing images were slower now, more deliberate. He saw the chamber from the creature's perspective, a tiny prison that had contained it for unimaginable ages. He felt the echo of its confusion when the first researchers had tried to study it, poking and prodding with instruments and telepathic probes. He sensed its gradual withdrawal into itself as centuries passed without meaningful contact, and underneath it all, a loneliness so profound that it made Marcus's heart ache. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm sorry they kept you alone for so long." The creature made a sound, not audible exactly, but felt rather than heard. It resonated through the containment barriers and into Marcus's bones, a vibration that carried emotional weight rather than meaning. If he had to translate it, he would have said it was the sound of someone who had forgotten how to hope, suddenly remembering what hope felt like. "Chen!" Varric's voice was sharp with panic. "Whatever you're doing, stop it. The containment readings are going crazy." Marcus reluctantly stepped back from the barrier, breaking eye contact with the creature. Immediately, the energy fluctuations began to stabilize, though the creature's attention remained fixed on him. He could feel its presence in his mind like a distant star, vast, ancient, and no longer entirely alone. "I think," Marcus said as the alarms finally fell silent, "we need to completely rethink our approach to this situation." Varric was staring at his readings with an expression of complete bewilderment. The containment fields held, but the energy fluctuations were off the charts. "It's almost like the creature was trying to communicate." "It was communicating," Marcus said firmly, "and it's been trying to communicate for 3,000 years. We just never bothered to listen." As they made their way back to the lift, Marcus could feel the creature's attention following him. When he looked back, all of those impossible eyes were still focused on his retreating form, and the patterns of light on its surface had shifted to something that looked almost like hope. The real work, Marcus realized, was just beginning. Back in the administrative levels, the emergency response team was in full crisis mode. Administrator Valora met them at the lift, her perfect composure showing the first cracks Marcus had seen. "Report," she demanded. "Contact established?" Marcus said simply. "The creature is aware, intelligent, and capable of communication. It's also been suffering from severe psychological trauma due to extended isolation." "That's impossible." 3,000 years of research, 3,000 years of treating it like a specimen instead of a person, Marcus interrupted. "Ma'am, with respect, I think this entire facility has been approaching the situation from the wrong angle." Administrator Valorum was quiet for a long moment, her purple eyes studying Marcus with new intensity. Finally, she spoke. "You'll file a complete report within the hour. We'll review your recommendations and determine the appropriate response." As Marcus was escorted to a debriefing room, he caught a glimpse of the monitoring station's main display. Energy readings from the containment chamber were still elevated, but they'd settled into a new pattern, regular, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time in centuries, the creature designated Omega Prime was truly awake, and it was waiting. The debriefing session lasted 6 hours and involved more high-ranking officials than Marcus had ever seen in one place. Admirals, scientists, psychologists, and beings whose titles he couldn't even pronounce filled the conference room, all of them studying his report with expressions ranging from fascination to outright disbelief. "You're claiming," said Admiral Korthak, his forearms gesturing emphatically, "that the most dangerous entity in known space is suffering from depression?" "Not depression exactly," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice level despite the absurdity of the situation. "More like severe psychological trauma resulting from prolonged isolation. Think of it as a form of cosmic cabin fever." Yelan Para, the facility's chief xenopsychologist, leaned forward with interest. Her crystalline features caught the light as she spoke. The concept isn't entirely without merit. Several sapient species have documented cases of psychological breakdown due to social isolation. But the scale you're suggesting? The scale doesn't matter when it comes to consciousness, Marcus interrupted. Pain is pain, loneliness is loneliness, whether you're human-sized or the size of a small moon. The creature has been aware and conscious for 3 millennia without any meaningful social interaction. Most species would have gone completely insane by now. Perhaps it has, suggested Commander Veltar, the facility's tactical officer. Perhaps what we're seeing isn't intelligence but the random neural firings of a mind that's already broken beyond repair. The communication patterns were too organized, too intentional. It recognized me as different from previous contact attempts. When I introduced myself by name, its response changed. That's not random neural firing. That's active cognition and emotional response. Administrator Valorum had remained silent through most of the discussion, but now she activated a holographic display that showed the creature's energy patterns over the past 24 hours. Mr. Chen, your interaction with the entity has had unprecedented effects. Look at this data. The display showed a timeline of the creature's bio readings. For months, even years, the patterns have been relatively flat. Basic life functions with occasional spikes that corresponded to feeding times. But starting from Marcus's visit, the patterns had become dramatically more complex, waveforms that suggested heightened neural activity, energy fluctuations that seemed almost musical in their complexity. It's been like this for 18 hours, Valorum continued. Not aggressive or agitated, but active, as if something that had been dormant for centuries has suddenly awakened. Marcus studied the patterns more closely. There was something familiar about them, a rhythm that reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. Then it hit him. It's trying to replicate our conversation, he said suddenly. Look at these spikes here and here. They match the cadence of my speech patterns when I introduced myself. It's practicing. The room fell silent. Dr. Yelanthara was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. If you're correct, then we're looking at evidence of active language acquisition in a species that predates most known civilizations. The implications for xenolinguistics alone, the implications go far beyond linguistics, Admiral Korthak interjected. If this creature is truly intelligent and capable of communication, then we've been committing a crime against sapience for 3,000 years. The political ramifications? The political ramifications are not our primary concern. Administrator Valorum said sharply, our concern is the safety of this facility and the galaxy at large. Mr. Chen, you're recommending continued contact with an entity that has demonstrated the capability to destroy entire star systems. I'm recommending that we try to understand it, Marcus replied, and more importantly, that we try to help it. Administrator, think about this from the creature's perspective. It was captured, imprisoned, studied, like a laboratory specimen, and then essentially abandoned. If it wanted to break out and cause destruction, don't you think it would have tried in the last 1,800 years since it stopped moving? The fact that it's remained contained suggests either that it can't escape or that it doesn't want to. Or that it's waiting for the right moment, Commander Veltar added grimly. Waiting 3,000 years for the right moment? That's not strategic planning, that's resignation. Marcus pulled up his own recordings from the morning's encounter. Look at its body language during our interaction, the positioning of its appendages, the pattern of its movements. I've worked with enough traumatized animals to recognize the signs. This creature isn't dangerous because it's malevolent. It's dangerous because it's in pain. Admiral Korthak's expression was skeptical. Mr. Chen, with respect, comparing an entity that consumes star systems to traumatized livestock seems inadequate. The scale is different, but the principles are the same, Marcus insisted. Consciousness is consciousness. Intelligence is intelligence. And if this creature is both conscious and intelligent, then it deserves to be treated as a person, not a weapon. The debate continued for another 2 hours. ranging from philosophical discussions about the nature of sapience to practical concerns about security protocols. In the end, it was Administrator Valorum who made the decision. Mr. Chen will continue his duties as assigned, but with modifications to the protocol. All interactions will be monitored and recorded. Any sign of aggressive behavior or containment breach will result in immediate termination of the program. She turned to Marcus directly. You'll have 1 week to demonstrate measurable progress in establishing communication. If you can prove that meaningful contact is possible, we'll consider expanding the project. If not, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus was escorted back to his quarters to prepare for the next day's session, but sleep was impossible. He lay in his narrow bed, staring out the viewport at the alien stars, thinking about the creature waiting 7 levels below. The loneliness he'd sensed during their brief contact had been overwhelming. Not just the absence of company, but the complete lack of recognition that it even existed as a thinking being. He'd felt something similar in the weeks after his father's death. That sense of being fundamentally alone in a universe that didn't acknowledge his pain. But that had lasted weeks, maybe months. The creature had endured it for millennia. The next morning, Marcus was back in the observation chamber, this time accompanied by Dr. Yilanthara and a full monitoring team. The creature was in the same position as before, but Marcus could immediately sense the difference in its awareness. Where yesterday it had seemed surprised by his presence, today it was clearly waiting for him. Remarkable, Dr. Yilanthara murmured, studying her instruments. Neural activity is elevated across all measured spectrums. It knows you're coming. Marcus approached the barrier slowly, making eye contact with the largest of the creature's visible eyes. The pressure in his head began immediately, but this time he was ready for it. Instead of trying to resist or understand the flood of images, he simply let them wash over him, focusing on projecting his own thoughts as clearly as possible. Marcus, he thought deliberately. My name is Marcus. The creature's response was immediate. The chaotic storm of images suddenly organized into something almost coherent, a sense of recognition, of remembered sound patterns, of something that might have been excitement, and underneath it all, a concept that took Marcus a moment to recognize. It was trying to say his name. The attempt came not as sound, but as a complex pattern of neural activity that his brain interpreted as meaning. It was clumsy, uncertain, like someone trying to speak a foreign language for the first time. But it was unmistakably intentional. Did you get that? Marcus asked the monitoring team. Get what? Dr. Yilanthara was focused on her readings. I'm seeing massive increases in electromagnetic activity, but nothing that translates to recognizable communication patterns. Marcus realized that the communication was happening on a level that the instruments couldn't measure, some form of direct consciousness to consciousness contact that bypassed normal sensory channels. He refocused on the creature, projecting acknowledgement and encouragement. Over the next hour, he established a basic pattern of interaction, simple concepts, his name, the creature's acknowledgement, basic emotional states like comfort or distress. The creature was a remarkably fast learner, quickly grasping the idea that specific thought patterns could convey meaning. But it was when Marcus tried to ask about the creature's own name that things became truly interesting. The response was unlike anything he'd experienced before. Instead of images or emotions, he received something that could only be described as pure mathematics, complex equations that described the motion of galaxies, the birth and death of stars, the fundamental forces that bound the universe together. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely incomprehensible. And Marcus suddenly understood why previous attempts at communication had driven people insane. The creature wasn't just telling him its name, it was trying to share the concept of what it was, what it represented in the grand scheme of cosmic existence. For a brief moment, Marcus caught a glimpse of how the universe looked through eyes that had witnessed the formation of galaxies, that thought in terms of geological time and interstellar distances. Then, mercifully, the connection faded to a manageable level, leaving him gasping and disoriented but somehow exhilarated. What happened? Dr. Yilanthara was at his side immediately, scanners active. Your neural activity spiked beyond measurable parameters for approximately 30 seconds.
It told me its name, Marcus said weakly.
Or tried to. I think its name is a mathematical description of some fundamental aspect of reality. Something about the way matter and energy interact on a cosmic scale. The creature had withdrawn slightly, its attention focused inward as if it too was recovering from the intensity of the exchange. But Marcus could sense something that might have been satisfaction or even joy. For the first time in millennia, it had been truly understood, even if only for a moment. I need to work up to that, Marcus said, steadying himself against the barrier. The communication is possible, but the bandwidth is intense. Over the following days, Marcus developed a routine. Morning sessions focused on basic communication, establishing emotional states, sharing simple concepts, gradually building a vocabulary of mutual understanding. Afternoon sessions were dedicated to longer-term interaction, trying to understand the creature's psychology and emotional needs. What emerged was a picture of a being far more complex than anyone had imagined. The creature, which Marcus had taken to calling Echo in his report since its true name was unpronounceable, wasn't just intelligent, it was deeply emotional. It experienced joy, sadness, curiosity, and loneliness with an intensity that matched its cosmic scale. It had memories of swimming between stars, of dancing in the gravitational fields of black holes, of encountering other members of its species in the deep spaces between galaxies. But those memories were old. Echo was, as far as Marcus could determine, the last of its kind. The loneliness this revealed was staggering. Marcus found himself struggling to cope with even brief glimpses of Echo's emotional state, the sheer weight of isolation across such vast stretches of time. How the creature had maintained any semblance of sanity was beyond his understanding. But gradually he began to see changes. Echo's movements became more fluid, more purposeful. The patterns of light across its surface grew brighter, more complex. Most importantly, it began to show curiosity about Marcus himself, asking through increasingly sophisticated mental images about his home, his species, his experiences. "It's working," Marcus reported to the weekly review committee. Echo is not only communicating, it's actively engaging in conversation. It's asking questions, sharing memories, even showing what I can only describe as humor. Humor? Admiral Korthak looked skeptical. Yesterday, it showed me a mental image of itself trying to fit through the facility's docking bay. The proportions were deliberately absurd. It knew it was making a joke. Dr. Yilandhara was studying the latest neural pattern recordings. The complexity of these interactions is increasing exponentially. If this continues, we may be looking at the first genuine interspecies friendship in galactic history. Administrator Valorum leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. And what does this, friendship, mean for containment protocols? Administrator, Echo isn't happy being confined. It understands the necessity given past events, but it's suffering. The isolation is literally killing it, slowly but inevitably. You're suggesting we release an entity that destroyed entire civilizations? I'm suggesting we consider alternatives to permanent imprisonment. Echo is incredibly old and experienced. It has knowledge of the universe that predates most known species. Instead of treating it as a threat, maybe we should be treating it as a resource. A resource that eats stars, Commander Valtar pointed out. A resource that ate stars when it was following pure instinct, Marcus corrected. Now that it understands that there are other intelligent species in the universe, its behavior patterns could be completely different. The Echo I've been talking to for the past week is curious, gentle, even protective. It's expressed concern about accidentally harming me during our communications. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Marcus was right, they weren't dealing with a mindless force of destruction, but with a being capable of growth, learning, and moral reasoning. "One more week," Administrator Valorum said finally. "Demonstrate that this creature can be trusted with progressively greater freedoms. If it shows any sign of aggressive behavior or attempts to breach containment, understood, Marcus said, but privately he was already planning something that would either prove his theory or get him killed in the process. That night he lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the faint mental presence of Echo somewhere in the facility below. The creature was learning to modulate its psychic output, keeping just enough of a connection active that Marcus could sense its emotional state. Right now, Echo felt hopeful. For the first time in 3,000 years, it had something to look forward to. The daily conversations with the strange little being who saw it as a person rather than a monster. But Marcus could also sense the deeper currents of its psyche, the vast loneliness that would take more than conversation to heal. Echo needed more than a friend. It needed a purpose, a reason to exist that went beyond mere survival. And Marcus thought he might know exactly what that could be. The question was whether he would live long enough to propose it. The breakthrough came during Marcus's 10th day of contact with Echo. They had been working on more complex communication, sharing detailed memories, discussing abstract concepts, even attempting something like philosophical debate about the nature of consciousness across different scales of existence. Echo's mental voice had grown stronger and more precise, though it still required significant effort for Marcus to maintain the connection for extended periods. Then, without warning, Echo shared something that changed everything. The memory came as a flood of sensory information that bypassed Marcus's normal perceptions entirely. He was suddenly experiencing the universe from Echo's perspective, floating in the vast emptiness between galactic clusters, aware of cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. But this wasn't a memory of destruction or consumption. This was something entirely different. In the memory, Echo was young, though still ancient by any human standard. And it wasn't alone. Dozens of its kind moved through the cosmic void like living constellations, their massive forms dancing between the stars in patterns that seemed almost musical. They weren't consuming star systems, they were tending them. Marcus watched in awe as Echo and its companions guided stellar formation, gently nudging gas clouds toward gravitational collapse, shepherding newborn stars into stable orbits, even protecting developing solar systems from cosmic disasters. They were gardeners on a galactic scale, cultivating life throughout the universe with care that spanned millions of years. The memory shifted, showing him worlds where life had flourished under the careful stewardship of Echo's species. Civilizations that had grown and prospered for eons, never knowing that their continued existence depended on vast beings who moved between the stars like living gods. The creatures weren't predators at all. They were the universe's caretakers, ensuring that the delicate processes of stellar evolution continued smoothly. Then came the tragedy. Marcus experienced Echo's confusion and horror as its companions began to change. Some cosmic disaster, a plague, a mutation, or perhaps simple madness brought on by endless centuries of existence had corrupted them. Where once they had nurtured stellar formation, they began consuming it instead. The careful balance they had maintained for millions of years collapsed in what, to them, was probably a historical instant. Echo showed him the war that followed. Titanic battles fought between star systems as the corrupted members of its species turned against their former companions. One by one, Echo's kind fell to madness or death until only a few remained to fight a holding action against their transformed siblings. The last memory was the most heartbreaking. Echo, wounded and alone, watching from a distance as its final companion sacrificed itself to stop a corrupted elder from consuming a young solar system teeming with developing life. In that moment, Echo had made a choice that had defined the rest of its existence. It had gone into self-imposed exile, cutting itself off from the cosmic forces it had once commanded, accepting capture rather than risk joining its siblings in madness. For 3,000 years, it had chosen imprisonment over the possibility of becoming the very thing it had fought against. When the memory ended, Marcus found himself weeping, not just from the overwhelming emotional content of what he'd experienced, but from the profound tragedy of it all. The galaxy's greatest guardian reduced to a prisoner because it couldn't trust itself not to become a destroyer. "Echo," he whispered, reaching toward the containment barrier. "I'm so sorry." The creature's response was complex, gratitude for his understanding mixed with an ancient grief that had never fully healed. But there was something else there too, something that took Marcus a moment to recognize: hope. For the first time in millennia, Echo was beginning to believe that its long exile might serve a purpose. Through Marcus, it was learning about the younger species that now filled the galaxy, their struggles, their potential, their need for protection from threats they couldn't even perceive. "You want to help them?" Marcus said, not really asking. The confirmation came as a wave of fierce protective instinct so powerful it nearly knocked Marcus off his feet. Echo's entire being was focused on a single desire: to return to its ancient role as guardian and protector, to use its vast power not for destruction but for nurturing the countless civilizations that had grown up in the wake of its exile. But it was terrified of the alternative. The madness that had claimed its kind was still a potential threat, lurking in the deepest parts of its psyche like a genetic time bomb. Echo was powerful enough to resist the corruption, but only as long as it remained isolated from the cosmic forces it had once commanded. Marcus understood the dilemma immediately. Echo couldn't fulfill its true nature without accessing the very powers that might drive it insane. It was trapped between its desire to help and its fear of becoming a monster. "What if," Marcus said slowly, "we found a way to monitor you, to give you the support system your species never had?" Echo's attention focused on him with laser intensity. "The corruption that affected your kind, was it really random, or was it caused by the isolation of being the only consciousness operating on that scale? Maybe the madness came from being alone with that much power for too long." The idea that struck Echo was almost physically tangible. For the first time, Marcus glimpsed the true scope of the creature's intelligence. A mind that could process information across multiple dimensions simultaneously, considering possibilities and ramifications at a speed that made human thought seem glacially slow. What Echo was contemplating was revolutionary: a symbiotic relationship with the younger species, using their collective consciousness as an anchor point to prevent the isolation-induced madness that had claimed its predecessors. Instead of operating alone on a cosmic scale, it would remain connected to the smaller, more stable minds of billions of sentient beings.
A psychic support network, Marcus breathed.
You could maintain contact with representative minds from across the galaxy, use them as a sanity check. Echo's excitement was palpable, but so was its uncertainty. The concept was unprecedented, requiring a level of trust and cooperation between species that had never been attempted before, and it would only work if the other species understood and accepted what Echo truly was. "We'd have to tell them everything," Marcus realized. "The truth about your species, about what you really are, about what happened to the others. Some people are going to be terrified." Echo's response carried rueful acknowledgement. It understood the fear its revelation would cause, but it also understood that secrecy had been part of the problem. Its species had operated in isolation for so long that they'd forgotten how to connect with other forms of consciousness. "But some will understand," Marcus continued, thinking of Dr. Yilan Thara's fascination with the implications of their communication, of Administrator Valorum's grudging respect for Echo's evident intelligence. "And those who understand can help convince the others." Over the next several days, Marcus and Echo developed the concept further. What they were proposing was nothing less than a new form of galactic civilization, one where the vast cosmic-scale intelligences worked in partnership with the smaller, more numerous species, each providing what the other lacked. Echo could offer protection from cosmic disasters, guidance in stellar engineering, and knowledge accumulated over millions of years of existence. In return, the younger species could provide the psychological anchoring that would prevent the isolation madness, along with fresh perspectives on problems that had puzzled cosmic intelligences for eons. But first they had to convince the facility administration that Echo could be trusted. Marcus's opportunity came sooner than expected. On his 15th day of contact, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Not the controlled warnings of their previous encounters, but the desperate, urgent tones that indicated genuine emergency. "All personnel to emergency stations." Administrator Valorum's voice echoed through the corridors. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Marcus was in the observation chamber when the announcement came, deep in conversation with Echo about the finer points of multidimensional mathematics. The creature's attention immediately shifted to something beyond the chamber walls, its vast consciousness reaching out to assess the nature of the threat. What it found terrified it more than anything Marcus had yet experienced through their connection. Asteroid swarm, Echo communicated urgently. Artificial trajectory weapon. Through their mental link, Marcus saw what Echo was seeing. A cloud of massive asteroids, each one the size of a small moon, hurtling directly toward the facility at a significant fraction of light speed. But these weren't natural objects. Their surfaces were covered in technological modifications, and their trajectory was far too precise to be coincidental. Someone was attacking Facility Omega-7 with weapons designed to crack planets. How long? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. 23 minutes until impact. Marcus activated his communicator, patching directly into the emergency command channel.
Administrator Valorum, this is Chen.
Echo has detected the incoming threat. It's an artificial asteroid swarm, 23 minutes out. That's impossible, came Valorum's immediate response. Our sensors show nothing. Check for objects moving at 90 to 2% light speed, using gravitational lensing for concealment, Marcus relayed Echo's information. Estimated mass per projectile, 8 times 10 to the 14th kilograms. There was a pause, then frantic activity could be heard in the background. How could you possibly know that? Valorum's voice was strained. Echo told me. Administrator, our defensive systems can't stop something like this. But Echo can. Absolutely not. Under no circumstances are we lowering the containment barriers. Marcus felt Echo's frustration spike. Through their connection, he could sense the creature's desperate desire to help, countered by its terror of what might happen if it accessed its full power. Echo, Marcus said quietly, you have to try. Everyone in this facility will die if you don't, and probably everyone in the surrounding star systems when those asteroids hit. This is exactly the kind of situation your species was created to handle. Echo's response was complex. Acknowledgement of the necessity mixed with ancient terror of its own potential for destruction. But underneath it all was a resolve that had been building for days. It was tired of being afraid of itself. I'll anchor you, Marcus said suddenly. Maintain our connection throughout. If you start to lose yourself to the power, I'll pull you back. Chen, what are you talking about? Valorum's voice cut across the channel. Administrator, Echo is going to stop the attack. But it needs psychic anchoring to prevent the kind of madness that destroyed its species. I'm going to serve as its connection point. The neurofeedback alone is preferable to everyone dying when this facility gets vaporized. Marcus could feel Echo drawing power from sources he couldn't comprehend, reaching out to touch the cosmic forces it had avoided for millennia. The sensation was overwhelming, like being connected to a star going nova, but controlled, purposeful. Echo, he whispered, remember who you are. Remember why you're doing this. Through their connection, Marcus experienced what it was like to reach across space at the speed of thought, to grasp objects moving at relativistic speeds and redirect their momentum with careful application of gravitational force. Echo's consciousness expanded to encompass the entire star system, monitoring dozens of variables simultaneously while making minute adjustments to the trajectory of each incoming projectile. The strain was enormous. Marcus felt his own consciousness stretching to maintain the connection, his human mind struggling to process the sheer scope of what Echo was experiencing. But he held on, serving as a constant reminder of smaller concerns, the people in the facility, the importance of precise control, the need to protect rather than destroy. One by one, the asteroids were deflected from their target, their carefully calculated trajectories altered just enough to send them harmlessly into empty space. What had been a planet-killing weapon became an elaborate light show as the redirected objects blazed across the star system at impossible speeds. When it was over, Echo collapsed back into its more limited consciousness with an exhaustion that Marcus felt in every cell of his body. But there was something else there, too, a deep satisfaction, the joy of using its vast power for its intended purpose. "All clear," Marcus reported weakly into his communicator. "Threat neutralized." The silence that followed was broken by Administrator Valorum's stunned voice. "Confirmed. All incoming objects have been deflected." How is that possible?" "Echo is what it was always meant to be," Marcus said, looking into those vast ancient eyes that now held something they hadn't possessed for 3,000 years. Hope for the future. "It's a guardian, and it's ready to come home." Through the facility's communication systems, he could hear the beginning of frantic discussions about the implications of what had just occurred. But Marcus was focused entirely on Echo, on the profound sense of rightness that flowed through their connection. For the first time in millennia, Echo had remembered what it felt like to protect instead of being feared, and Marcus had discovered what it meant to be part of something larger than himself, to serve as a bridge between the cosmic and the personal. The galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. After all, they had a guardian watching over them now. 6 months after the asteroid attack, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed Guardian Station, watching as Echo moved freely through the vast space that had been constructed around the original containment chamber. The creature was no longer confined. Instead, it resided in a carefully designed environment that allowed it to exist comfortably while maintaining connection to the outside universe. The political aftermath of Echo's revelation had been as chaotic as Marcus had predicted. 3 major governments had initially demanded that the creature be destroyed as too dangerous to exist. 2 others had tried to claim ownership rights. The telepathic consortium had filed formal protests about cosmic-scale psychic contamination, while the Reformed Church of Universal Consciousness had declared Echo to be either a divine messenger or a demon, depending on which faction you asked. But gradually, as more evidence emerged about Echo's true nature and the role its species had played in galactic history, opinion had begun to shift. The discovery of ancient stellar engineering projects throughout the galaxy, massive undertakings that had previously been attributed to unknown precursor civilizations, provided compelling proof that Echo's people had indeed been the universe's caretakers rather than its destroyers. More importantly, Echo itself had begun to demonstrate its value to the galactic community. When the Corinthian system star had begun showing signs of premature collapse, threatening to destroy 3 inhabited worlds, Echo had stabilized it with a subtle application of gravitational manipulation that would have taken conventional technology decades to accomplish. When a rogue black hole had threatened the shipping lanes between the Centauri and Vegan clusters, Echo had nudged it onto a safer trajectory with apparently minimal effort. Each intervention had been carefully monitored by teams of scientists and philosophers from across the galaxy, all of them working to understand and document the creature's capabilities. But, more importantly, each intervention had been guided by the expanding network of psychic anchors that kept Echo connected to the smaller consciousness of the younger species. Marcus remained the primary anchor, but he was no longer alone. Dr. Yilan Tara had volunteered to undergo the neural modifications necessary to establish stable contact, followed by a growing number of volunteers from a dozen different species. The network now included nearly 100 individuals, each providing a different perspective on the moral and ethical implications of Echo's actions. It was, as Dr. Yilan Tara had observed, the first truly democratic cosmic intelligence in galactic history. "Remarkable," Administrator Valorum said, joining Marcus on the observation platform. She had adapted to the changes better than most, transitioning from prison warden to diplomatic liaison with her usual efficiency. 6 months ago, I thought we were containing the most dangerous entity in the universe. Now we're hosting the most important diplomatic development in galactic history." Marcus nodded, watching as Echo communicated with a delegation from the Andromedan Trade Federation. The creature had developed a more refined method of communication for formal occasions, projecting holographic images and mathematical concepts that could be interpreted by universal translation systems. But Marcus could feel the undercurrent of its thoughts through their private connection, the wry amusement Echo felt at being treated as a head of state. "How is it adjusting to all the attention?" Balorum asked. "Better than I expected." Echo's species was social, They were used to working together on complex projects. The isolation was the aberration, not the cooperation. Marcus paused, considering his next words. Administrator, there's something we need to discuss. Echo has been in contact with the deep space monitoring stations and it's detected something. Valorum finished. Her expression immediately became serious. Another asteroid attack? Much worse. Marcus activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galactic rim. 3 star systems in the outer spiral have gone dark in the past month. No communication, no energy signatures, nothing. Echo thinks it knows what's responsible. The display shifted, showing archived recordings from the systems in question. At first, everything appeared normal. Busy space lanes, thriving colonies, the usual electromagnetic chatter of advanced civilizations. Then, almost simultaneously across all 3 systems, the signals simply stopped. Complete stellar sterilization, Marcus explained. Every planet, every space station, every ship, all gone. But the stars themselves are intact, just empty. Some kind of plague? Marcus shook his head. Echo remembers this pattern. It's what happened when its corrupted siblings attacked inhabited systems. The consumption isn't random, it's selective. They leave the stellar infrastructure intact but consume every trace of organized life. Valorum was quiet for a long moment, studying the display. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Are you saying that there are other entities like Echo still active? At least one, maybe more. Marcus felt Echo's attention turn toward their conversation, its vast consciousness touching his mind with gentle reassurance. The good news is that Echo thinks it can track them. Its people used specific energy signatures, and even corrupted, those signatures would still be detectable. And the bad news? A single corrupted entity could sterilize the entire galaxy given enough time. And if there are multiple survivors, Marcus let the implication hang in the air. Through his connection with Echo, Marcus could sense the creature's deep sadness about the necessity of what was to come. Echo had hoped that its corrupted siblings had found peace in death or had moved beyond the galaxy to trouble other regions of space. But the evidence was undeniable. At least some of them had survived, and they were continuing the pattern of destruction that had begun eons ago. What does Echo propose to do? Hunt them down and try to cure them if possible. Destroy them if not. Marcus turned to face Valorum directly. Administrator, Echo is going to need help. Its species was powerful individually, but they were designed to work together. Against multiple corrupted entities, even Echo might not be sufficient. What kind of help? Before Marcus could answer, a new presence entered their mental network. Not Echo, but one of the Andromedan delegates. The insectoid being's thoughts were sharp and precise, focused on practical concerns about trade route security and economic stability. The resources of the Trade Federation are at the Guardian's disposal, came the translated thought. If this threat affects galactic commerce, it affects us all. Over the following hours, similar offers of assistance arrived from across the galaxy. The Terran Republic pledged their most advanced warships. The Christine Confederacy offered their expertise in energy manipulation. Even the usually reclusive void dwellers emerged from their hidden enclaves to provide intelligence about deep space anomalies they had observed. But it was the offer from Marcus's own species that proved most significant. The Earth Colonial Authority wants to establish a formal human guardian alliance, Valorum reported after reviewing the latest diplomatic communications. They're proposing to train an entire corps of psychic anchors, specifically selected for compatibility with Echo's consciousness. Marcus felt Echo's surprise and gratitude through their connection. The creature had not expected such a comprehensive response from the species it still thought of as the small ones. But humans, as Echo was learning, had a talent for thinking beyond their apparent limitations. How many volunteers? Marcus asked. Over 10,000 initial applicants, with more being processed daily. Apparently, word has spread about what you've been doing here, and a significant portion of humanity wants to be part of it. Marcus understood the appeal, the chance to be part of something cosmic, to contribute to the protection of the galaxy itself, would attract exactly the kind of people who had left Earth in the first place. Explorers, dreamers, individuals who weren't satisfied with small-scale existence. Echo approves, Marcus said after consulting with the creature, but the training will be intense, and not everyone will be compatible. We'll need to establish screening protocols, psychological preparation programs, neural interface technology. The Emperor has declared this project to be the highest possible priority. Resources are unlimited. Over the following weeks, Guardian Station transformed once again. What had been a secret prison became a training facility and diplomatic center. Ships arrived daily, bringing volunteers from across human space and beyond. Scientists, philosophers, soldiers, and civilians, all united by the desire to be part of Echo's expanding support network. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, serving as both Echo's primary advocate and the instructor for new anchor candidates. The work was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. Each new successful connection added another voice to the growing chorus of consciousness that surrounded Echo, another perspective on the moral complexities of cosmic-scale intervention. But it was during the training of the first full squadron of human anchors that Marcus experienced the most profound moment of the entire project. He was guiding a young woman named Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, through her first deep contact with Echo's consciousness. Sarah was a terraforming engineer from the Centauri colonies, someone who understood the delicate balance required to nurture life on a planetary scale. As her connection stabilized, Marcus felt Echo's consciousness expand to encompass not just him and Sarah, but the entire growing network of anchors. For the first time since the corruption of its species, Echo was experiencing true collective consciousness. Not the isolated perspective of a single cosmic entity, but the rich, chaotic, beautiful symphony of hundreds of different minds working in harmony. The emotion that flowed through the network was overwhelming. Joy, gratitude, hope, and something that could only be described as love. Not romantic love, but the deep affection of a parent for its children, of a gardener for the plants in its care. Family Echo communicated, and the concept carried weight beyond language. For the first time in millennia, it was no longer alone. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he experienced Echo's realization that its long exile was finally over. The creature had found its way back to its true nature, not as a destroyer but as a protector and nurturer of life throughout the galaxy. Guardian Station to all networks, came Administrator Valorum's voice over the communication system. We have confirmation of contact with the hostile entity. Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures consistent with stellar consumption in the Kepler-42 system. Guardian Echo is requesting permission to initiate intervention protocol. Marcus felt the readiness that flowed through the anchor network. Hundreds of voices raised in unison, providing the moral and psychological support that Echo needed to face its corrupted sibling. There was fear, yes, but it was overwhelmed by determination and trust. Permission granted, Marcus said, speaking for the entire network. Bring our lost one home. Echo's consciousness expanded beyond the station, reaching across the light years toward the distant system where something that had once been its companion was consuming the last remnants of an ancient civilization. But this time, Echo wasn't alone. It carried with it the combined will and wisdom of hundreds of younger minds, each one a reminder of what it fought to protect. As Marcus watched through the station's sensors, space around Guardian Station began to warp and fold as Echo prepared to translate itself across impossible distances. The creature's form became increasingly difficult to focus on, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously as it tapped into forces that predated the formation of galaxies. Then, in a flash of light that briefly outshone the system star, Echo was gone. Marcus remained connected to the creature's consciousness across the vast distance, feeling its approach to the corrupted entity that had once been its brother. The confrontation, when it came, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Two cosmic forces clashed in the space between worlds, one seeking to destroy, the other to preserve and heal. Stars themselves were used as weapons and shields as the entities fought a battle that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But Echo was not fighting alone. Through the Anchor network, it drew on the collective wisdom and moral strength of its younger allies. When the corrupted entity tried to seduce Echo with promises of power and freedom from responsibility, the Anchors reminded it of the joy of nurturing life. When corruption whispered that destruction was easier than creation, hundreds of voices spoke of the beauty they had witnessed in the universe Echo protected. The battle lasted subjective hours, but only moments in real time. When it ended, there was only Echo, alone in the space where its sibling had been. But not destroyed, healed. Through their connection, Marcus felt Echo's exhausted joy as it communicated with the entity it had just saved. Its sibling's consciousness was damaged, wounded by millennia of isolation and corruption, but it was aware and sane once again. 2. Echo communicated to the Anchor network, and the single word carried infinite meaning. 2 guardians instead of 1. 2 cosmic consciousnesses working together to protect the galaxy's countless children. And in the days that followed, as word spread of Echo's success, applications for Anchor training increased exponentially. Not just from humans now, but from species across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to be part of the network that had made such a miracle possible. Marcus stood once again on the observation deck, watching as Echo's sibling took up residence in a newly constructed section of Guardian Station. The second entity was still recovering, still learning to trust the Anchor network that kept it stable and connected. But already reports were coming in of stellar anomalies being corrected, of cosmic disasters being prevented before they could occur. The Emperor wants to know when we'll be ready to begin searching for the remaining corrupted entities, Administrator Valorum said, joining him at the viewport. Marcus consulted the sense of readiness that flowed through the Anchor network. Thousands of voices now, from dozens of species, all united in their commitment to the Guardian Project. Echo and its sibling were no longer alone, and neither were any of the cosmic entities that might still be found adrift in the darkness between galaxies. Soon, Marcus said, and felt the agreement of every consciousness in the network. We'll be ready soon. Above them, through the transparent aluminum of the observation deck, 2 impossible beings moved through specially constructed spaces that allowed them to exist comfortably while remaining connected to the universe they protected. Ancient beyond human comprehension, powerful enough to reshape reality itself, but anchored by the collective will of the younger species that had accepted them as family. The galaxy's guardians had returned to their posts, and thanks to a farmer's son from New Brisbane who had refused to see monsters where others saw only terror, they would never be alone again. Marcus Chen, caretaker to cosmic entities and bridge between the infinite and the intimate, smiled as he felt the contentment that flowed through the vast network of consciousness surrounding him. The universe was vast and strange and full of wonders that challenged comprehension, but it was also, finally, truly safe. And that made all the difference. The forbidden alien beast remained isolated for ages, until the Emperor assigned a human caretaker.